As you are all aware, an author's afternoon is something that the initiative now been going on for 2 years in association with Telegraph, initiated by Priyanka Foundation and presented by Shri Cement. It is a great privilege to welcome today over here Mr. Arunava Sinha, a noted Indian translator who translates classic, modern, contemporary, fiction and non-fiction. And I personally was just speaking to him and telling him that, you know, many of us across the world are indebted to translators because they take gem of literature across the world and carry it across to people who don't know and not familiar with that specific language. So it's an honor actually. Thank you. And in conversation with him, we have Priyanka Mookerjee, and from Loretta House, which is many of us over here are from Loretta House actually. So it's a great thing to have you here with us. And she studied, very interesting, she studied narrative theory, film, international relations and popular culture in the United States. And her first novel, Eden, is already making waves across. So the two of them will be in conversation, which is the format over here. And once again, thank you, both of you. And I will ask you to now take the call.
Thank you so much. Am I able to be heard? Yes. Okay. So, the first time we ever spoke, he sent me a message saying, this is shortly after my book had come out. He sent me a message saying, I'm in town, would you like to meet? So I got into a panic. I said, Arunava Sinha has messaged me. I called my editor, Nimi. I said, Nimi, Arunava Sinha has messaged me. What should I do? What should I say? She said, go, be very serious, be very formal. He's a very important, influential man. Don't.
I am.
Don't go be your normal flighty self. Go impress him. And of course, he turned out to be the most fun, easygoing, lovely person ever.
Who?
So, I'm giving away secrets.
Me?
Is that it? Okay.
I'm very serious.
But you know, meeting him, you wouldn't think this is the person who's translated 34 books, 3 more in the offing. He runs the books page at Scroll, very influential. And more than anything, he's a lovely person, and he's a pillar of Indian publishing. He knows everything there is to know. Most incredibly well-read person I've met. And we'll mine that information further. So without further ado, I think let's start our session.
Okay.
Shall we? Yes. Okay. So, see, this is a big year for translation. The Man Booker has gone to The Vegetarian, not just the author, but also the translator of The Vegetarian. So I want to get into that a little bit first, because I think translation is very unfairly underrated, right? Because translations are something that we all read, right? Whether it's in primary education or throughout the rest of our lives, no one gets through life without reading translations. They sell well, which is more than than can be said of a lot of other kinds of fiction and non-fiction. So I want to ask you, as one of the most eminent translators around, what got you into translation? What keeps you there? And how is the process of translating a book different from that of writing something yourself?
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for those very kind words. And the winner of the Man Booker is not a vegetarian, although it is the vegetarian. I spoke to her and she said she eats meat. So that's, it was important. It was important for me.
Your respect for her stayed.
My respect, yeah, I mean, you know, I would be in trouble if it turned, because we were planning to meet, and if she was going to be eating vegetarian meals while, it would create a cultural disconnect that no amount of translation talk would be able to break.
It starts to make more and more sense that you wrote Bengali short stories in translation.
Yeah, yeah.
I can see the Bengali side in
there
you.
is
Mangsho na hole hobe na.
not one character in there who's a vegetarian. So yes, and the other thing is that how I began is now lost in the dim fog of time and history. I really have no idea, but I suspect I began because I wanted to steal other people's ideas and pass them off as my own. So, smart thing to do, you know, pick up something written in a language which your audience doesn't understand, write it out yourself word for word, and then say, look what I've got. And then this is Shotti, tu likhe cheez. And then some inner demon pops up its head and says, no, tell the truth. And I'm like, go away. No, go away. And anyway, so that's how it began. But on a lighter note, that was serious, translation is a drug. And like any drug, you can't explain to those who do not use that drug why it's a drug or what's so great about it.
People say this about kleptomania also. So,
if you're missing anything, anybody, don't look at me.
So
yeah, they say kleptomania is a drug, translation is a drug, talking too much is a drug.
Stealing people's things, ideas.
Stealing people's ideas and passing them off as your own is a drug.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it began, and that's how it's continued ever since, because it's so much easier to be a translator than to think. I mean, you think, Priyanka, how many sleepless nights have you spent worrying about what to put on the next page?
Less than you, I'm assuming, at this point.
No, I'd sleep very well, because when I sleep, because
Excuse me, there's an issue here. There's 22 people more who wants to give your name and wants to get in. I can't allow that. So you need to sort it out.
Now?
Whom you wanted, because their guests are there, want to come in, and there's no way I can admit more people.
How do I sort this out?
So I'm just saying that you told them to come for sure.
We can do another session afterwards for them
also.
also.
What I'm saying, but there's no way I can create more seated inside this room.
Let's do another session.
Yeah, we'll do another session.
We'll sit with them.
Sorry.
Very, very popular gent. I've never seen this. Is unprecedented.
No, nor have I. Yeah, I should
How we try to get people to come to our book launches. Please come.
I should just stay in Kolkata, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you would never get writer's block because the material is always out there on the left-hand side, and all you have to do is just put it in different words.
Right.
So why would you want to give that up for the pain of having to think up your own story and your own characters and then get bad reviews? See, if a translation gets a bad review, you can say the original was lousy. What can I do about it? But if it gets a great review, then you say, no.
So we're taking up something different in the future then. All right. Sounds good.
It's a business plan.
It's a business. No. As modest as he's being, the work is so lovely. You know, I read this interview with the translator of The Vegetarian, where she said the point of translating is to make it look like it was written in the language. If it sounds or reads translated, then you haven't done your job well. And this is, I think, something he's done spectacularly. So, I mean, I'll actually read out a line from his translation of the Kabuliwala, which I'm sure everyone here has read. And this line always makes me smile, right? I was like an eternal traveler, mining for places around the globe. But in the quiet corner of my room, I was so retiring by nature that the very notion of abandoning my corner and stepping out into the world made me have visions of the sky crashing down on my head. Now, this reminds me of every uncle, kaku, dada I have ever known, because this is a Bengali in his truest form. Love to dream, love to read, but jabo na, korbo na, don't want to do too much. So I want to ask you, why, this is a book of Bengali short stories that you've translated. Why are Bengalis so connected to stories, especially short stories? Historically, one of the great reading communities of the world. What do you think it is about our culture?
You want the right answer, or you want...
I want both.
I suppose the correct answer would be the fact that it's all, you have to blame the Brits for this, right? They came here and they decided to set up schools and teach everybody English and teach them literature. So we all started reading, and our forefathers started reading, and they liked it so much that they bought books. So everyone grew up with books in their house, and they went on reading. And it was, as you may not know this, but there may be some people in the audience who might remember, that there was a time when the standard gift for a wedding was a book. Yeah, you remember? So weddings, birthdays, uponayon, even sraddhos in some cases, I believe, books were given. So it was the done thing, and people often had extra copies which they passed around. So it was pretty much being brought. It's like Pokemon Go today. You know, you can't turn your head without seeing one. So it was like that. There were books everywhere. So you read, and what else did you do? You didn't have the internet. You didn't have WhatsApp. Yeah. So you read. Notion that a collection of stories needs people to invest 20 times once for each story, emotionally, to read it. And secondly, you can't say, because everyone wants to know, what is this book about? So novel, you can say, okay, this novel is about a guy meets a girl. Wow, never happened. but this book is a collection of 10 stories, and frankly, I've read only one of them, so I can't tell you what it's about. And I'm giving facile answers.
Experiments is about fiction also.
Shall I? Okay, I have a question which is very specific to translations. While translating, one often comes across situations where references are being made to things which are very specific to that language. Now, how does one handle that? When you are translating into another language, there are several semantic and other barriers which does not allow. For example, যদি বলতে হয় জীবনের নোট নিয়ে গেল ব্যাংক, ভাত নিয়ে গেল চিলে. Now, how do you translate that in English?
Yeah. No, this is what 7 years ago, before I started translating, I had hair like hers. Now I am like this. This is what has happened. So it's very difficult. But there is no there's no silver bullet for this. There's no one size fits all answer. You take each case and solve it the way you can. Sometimes you look for an equivalent idiom if it exists in the target language. Sometimes you weave in an explanation into the text itself in some way. For example, I'll give you a different example. Indian languages have this whole business of aap, tum and tu. And what form you're using immediately implies the relationship. English just has impoverished you, nothing more. So what do you do when you're trying to convey that someone is using apni and someone else is using tumi? So then you weave it in, you say, he said using the formal apni instead of the etc. So that's a second strategy. A third strategy is the one I hate, which is people use glossaries and footnotes. A fourth strategy, which many people have used, and I confess that I don't have the courage to go with it 100%, although I want to, I'm trying to build up the courage for this, is to actually say, to hell with you, I will translate it literally. And it's up to you, the reader, I don't care what culture you belong to, you walk the extra mile to figure out what it means. So for example, there's a very good translator of Bangla fiction named Proshenjit Gupta, who lives in the US, who's translated Ashapurna Devi's short stories, and all credit to him. His stories were on, this collection was only published last year, although he had finished it 12 years ago, because no Indian publisher would publish it in that form, because he has translated many of the idioms literally. So for example, Lojjay Matha Kata Galo, he has kept as she felt as though her head had been cut off in shame, instead of the cop out of her head hanging her head in shame, which he could have done, but he refused to do it because he said, I want to keep the structure and flow of the original. So all publishers turned him down, and he said, fine, then I will not publish, but I will not allow normalization of my language. So finally a publisher, Rashad, agreed, and they published him in that format, and frankly, it's great. It works. So all kinds of strategies are possible. And at a time when borders between cultures are disappearing, thanks really to the digital world, I think this is the time when you don't have to worry so much about how well what you are saying will travel. Let the reader travel.
It's interesting that you say that, because Neil Mukherjee's novel exactly does that. It's almost like you're reading in Bangla, if you know.
That's right. That is an act of
The
translation.
idiomatic usage is exactly
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
speak in Bangla.
So, which one do you find more difficult, to translate poetry or to translate stories? Because poetry has a lot of emotions. Bhabanubad korte hoy at the same time. If there is rhyme or something, if you want to do the justice, it's not very easy. Right?
No, no, poetry is by far the more difficult thing because there are many more things you have to pay attention to, and also you have to be a poet in some way. I don't know what it means to be a poet exactly. I mean, what switch gets flipped on. There's something there where you can, I mean, Anirban has started translating a lot of English lyrics into Bangla, and he's doing a brilliant job. He posts them on Facebook. And I can see that he's a poet because what he creates are original lines of poetry, which you can relate back to the original, but this is poetry in its own terms. So you have to have that thing in you, and I don't, frankly. So for me, it's a lot of engineering work.
So that's one question. So is there always a little bit lost in translation?
Let me put it this way. There's always something that is changed in translation. Whether it's lost or gained is a value judgment, and I hesitate to make that. Yeah?
We have time for one more question, I think.
Yes. See, the selection of stories you said was on what appealed to you personally. So, for example, the story The Offering, which has so much of superstition, even suggestion of rebirth. So, growing up in a Bengali household as you did, was it that you were very exposed to superstition which led you to get fascinated to the story? Do you relate to it on a personal level, or is it just fascinating at a superficial level?
No, no, I don't relate to it at all. I'm a very hardcore rationalist and atheist and a complete non-believer in superstitions and rebirth. And as Jotayu said, Hachi tik tiki, no, not Jotayu, Shukumar Rai said, Hachi tik tiki Bergman, kichu bishas kori na. So, no, so I didn't relate to it at that level, but I like the story at a literary level, at a level of storytelling.
We'll just take your question because you were.
I just wanted to ask you, as a translator and obviously a reader, have you noticed any trend in like Bengali short stories as you're translating? Any comments on that trend? I mean, is it more inward looking? Is it, I mean, has your central focus changed? Or
It most certainly has. It most certainly has. The Bengali short story was pretty much, or rather the short story was pretty much almost invented in Bengal in the late 19th century. And initially, it was a brand new form. Nobody even knew that such a form of fiction could exist. And in a sense, Rabindranath took it and sort of showed all that it was capable of doing. And from the point where he used it to talk about an individual in relation to the world around that individual, and he was very much on the side of injustice. So most of his stories, or many of his stories, focus on the lack of balance and the lack of justice between the central character and the society that he or she inhabits. From there, it moved on to, it acquired, like the rest of literature, it acquired issues. Short Chandra brought in issues of gender, brought in issues of caste, brought in issues of religion, and then nationalism and the patriotic fervor came into the story. Then what happened was that, as with everything else, because Bengali writers were pretty much in tune with what was happening in the world, modernist trends started coming in. The canvas shrank from Vibhuti Bhushan's large rural canvases. It shrank to the city, it shrank to the house, it shrank to small families. Ashapurna Devi's stories are all set within walls, literally tiny pokey flats. It shrank in physical spaces. It moved from a description of the person in relation to the external world to what was going on inside the head. Then, most importantly, the short story started looking at what you would call distortions in psyche. So people who were no longer, there was something wrong with them. There were demons in them. They were twisted. I'm using politically incorrect terms, because today you wouldn't say someone is twisted, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, so you can see a very clear, but then that it pretty much parallels the journey of Bengali fiction as a whole. I mean, even novels and other things have moved in the same direction. But there have been lots of interesting trends, and perhaps more experimentation with the short story than with the novel, because you can play around more with a shorter form. Much more of open-ended stories, much more of plotless stories, much more of monologues. I mean, there's a story here by a man named Udayan Ghosh, which is a remarkable story because of the way it's told. It's one of the finest political stories I've read.
Okay. So I think are we done with questions? Are we good? Okay, so I think we'll be doing signings.
So I'd like to invite Mansi Chatterjee. She's also a poet and a writer. She's a Bengali living in Toronto and writes in Hindi, poetry and short stories. To please present our tokens of appreciation to Arunava. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was probably one of the most entertaining authors afternoon we've ever had. Seriously. Thanks to both of you. And for everybody, there is a copy of the book over here for one to close the